Doctors were already preparing the family for the worst. A 16-year-old girl lay silent in a hospital bed, weeks into a coma, with no response and no guarantees. Hope was slipping away, until her sister stepped forward. She didn't beg the doctors. She didn't cry out in fear. She sang to God. What happened next stunned everyone in the room. Fingers moved, breathing changed, and then, slowly, her eyes opened. Nurses froze. Doctors stared in disbelief. Parents collapsed in tears. This isn't fiction or a movie scene. It's a real moment that shattered despair and reminded everyone watching that miracles can arrive when faith speaks louder than fear. The hospital room felt heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. Pale white walls reflected the soft glow of fluorescent lights, and the steady beeping of machines echoed like a slow, relentless clock counting down moments no one wanted to face. On the narrow bed lay a 16-year-old girl, her body still, her chest rising and falling only because a machine told it to. Tubes ran from her arms, wires rested against her chest, and a thin blanket barely moved as she breathed. Her face looked peaceful, almost as if she were sleeping after a long day at school, but everyone in that room knew the truth. This was not sleep. Days had blurred into nights, and nights into days. Doctors came and went, their voices low, their expressions careful. Words like coma, no response, and critical had been spoken so many times that they no longer shocked anyone. They just hurt. Every test had been run, every option discussed. And still, there was no change. The girl didn't squeeze a hand. She didn't blink. She didn't react to voices or tears or prayers whispered at her bedside. Her mother sat in a chair that had become her home. Dark circles under her eyes. Hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles were white. She had stopped crying loudly days ago. Now her tears came silently, slipping down her cheeks as she stared at her daughter's face, searching for any sign, any movement, any proof that she was still there. Her father stood near the window, pretending to look outside, though he hadn't really seen the world beyond that glass in days. Every few minutes he wiped his face and took a deep breath, trying to be strong, trying not to break. And then there was the sister. She was younger, smaller, standing quietly near the foot of the bed. She had watched everything, every doctor's visit, every whispered conversation, every moment her parents thought she wasn't listening. She had heard the fear in their voices late at night. She had heard the words they tried not to say out loud. But unlike everyone else, she refused to believe that this was the end of the story. She stepped closer to the bed, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. She looked at her sister's face, memorizing it, just in case. Her hands trembled as she reached out, gently holding her sister's cold fingers. They felt lifeless, but she held them anyway, squeezing softly as if trying to send her own warmth through her skin. The room was silent except for the machines. No one noticed when the sister closed her eyes. No one stopped her when she took a shaky breath. She wasn't thinking about doctors or diagnoses anymore. She wasn't thinking about what could go wrong. In that moment, there was only one thought in her mind. God, please hear me. Her voice came out quiet at first, barely more than a whisper. It wasn't a performance. There was no confidence, no perfection, just a fragile, trembling sound filled with love and desperation. Each word carried years of shared laughter, shared secrets, shared childhood memories. Every note held fear, hope, and a belief that refused to die. As she sang, the atmosphere in the room began to change. It was subtle, almost impossible to explain. The air felt warmer, heavier, like something unseen had stepped into the space. A nurse walking past the door slowed down, drawn by the sound. Another stopped completely, listening. Even the parents felt it, the way the room seemed to pause, as if time itself had decided to wait. The sister kept singing, tears streaming down her face, falling onto the blanket. Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. She sang through the fear, she sang through the pain, she sang as if this was the only thing she had left to give. No one expected a miracle, no one dared to hope for one anymore. But in that quiet hospital room, with a sister singing to God and a girl lying between life and silence, something was about to change, something that would leave everyone forever different. The sister's voice continued to echo softly through the room, fragile yet unwavering. Every word trembled, not from weakness, but from the weight of everything she was carrying in her heart. It wasn't a polished melody. It was raw. It was imperfect, and somehow that made it more powerful. Each note felt like a prayer lifted into the air, wrapping itself around the hospital bed, the machines, and the silent girl lying there. Time seemed to slow. The steady beeping of the monitor blended with the singing, creating a strange, almost sacred rhythm. Nurses who had walked these halls hundreds of times without pause now stood still. One leaned against the wall near the door, her hand covering her mouth as tears welled in her eyes. Another nurse whispered softly, not wanting to break the moment, "That's her sister." The parents looked at each other, unsure of what they were feeling. Fear mixed with hope, and hope felt dangerous after so many disappointments. The mother pressed her hand to her chest, her breathing shallow, as if she were afraid that even inhaling too loudly might interrupt whatever was happening. The father stepped closer to the bed, his eyes fixed on his daughter's face, searching it with a desperation he could no longer hide. The sister reached the chorus of the song, her voice breaking completely now. Tears blurred her vision, but she didn't wipe them away. She sang through them, her words barely holding together. Her grip on her sister's hand tightened slightly, more instinct than intention, like she was anchoring herself to the only thing that mattered. Then it happened, so small that it could have been dismissed, so slight that it could have been imagined. The fingers in her hand twitched. At first, no one said anything. The sister froze, her heart slamming against her ribs. She looked down, afraid to breathe. Had she felt that? Or was it just her own trembling? She swallowed hard and kept singing, afraid that stopping might make it disappear. A nurse near the door leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Did you see that?" she whispered to another nurse. The monitor beeped again. The rhythm shifted, just slightly, a change so subtle it would have gone unnoticed on any other day, but not this one. Not after weeks of nothing. The mother stepped closer, her legs weak beneath her. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The sister's voice grew stronger, not louder but steadier. Her fear turned into urgency. She sang like she was calling her sister home, like her voice was a bridge between two worlds. The words poured out of her, no longer controlled, no longer careful. Then the girl's breathing changed. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't sudden. But it was different. Less mechanical. More her. A doctor passing by stopped abruptly, noticing the cluster of nurses at the door. "What's going on?" he asked. No one answered right away. They were all watching the bed. And then it happened again. This time, everyone saw it. The girl's fingers moved, clearly, undeniably. Her hand curled slightly around her sister's. The room erupted in quiet chaos. "Oh my God," someone whispered. "Call the doctor," another voice said urgently. The mother let out a sob so deep it sounded like it came from somewhere beyond her chest, and she dropped to her knees beside the bed, clutching the mattress as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. The sister sang through her tears, her voice shaking violently now. She was terrified and hopeful all at once. Her sister's eyelids fluttered just barely, like they were too heavy to lift, but trying anyway. Doctors rushed in, their calm professionalism cracking as they saw what was happening. "Stay with her," one of them said, glancing at the sister. "Keep talking. Keep doing what you're doing." The sister nodded, her voice barely steady as she continued. And then, slowly, so slowly it felt unreal, the girl's eyes opened, not wide, not fully, just enough. A collective gasp filled the room. Hands flew to mouths. Tears streamed freely. The father covered his face, shaking, unable to stand any longer. Nurses cried openly. Doctors stared in disbelief, their training unable to fully explain what they were witnessing. The sister stopped singing for just a second. Her breath caught in her throat as she met her sister's eyes, confused, tired, alive. In that moment, no one cared about charts or statistics or medical explanations. All that mattered was that a voice filled with love had reached someone everyone else thought was lost. And she had answered. The room exploded into motion, yet somehow everything still felt unreal. Doctors rushed forward, calling out instructions, checking monitors, shining lights, adjusting equipment. But beneath the urgency, there was shock, pure, unmistakable shock. This was not how moments like this usually went. This was not something they saw every day. The sister stood frozen beside the bed, her hand still wrapped around her sister's fingers, afraid that if she let go, everything might disappear. The girl's eyes remained open, blinking slowly, like she was waking from the deepest sleep of her life. Her gaze moved slightly, unfocused at first, then settling on the familiar face beside her. Confusion crossed her expression. Her lips parted, trying to form a sound, but nothing came out. Still, that effort alone sent a wave of emotion crashing through the room. "She's awake," a nurse whispered through tears. "She's really awake." The mother clutched the edge of the bed, her whole body shaking. She reached out, hesitant, almost scared to touch her daughter, as if this moment were too fragile to survive contact. When she finally placed her hand on her daughter's arm, she sobbed uncontrollably, repeating her name over and over, like saying it enough times would anchor her daughter to this world. The father stood rooted to the spot, tears streaming freely down his face. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times and had given up on it just as many. Now that it was happening, his knees buckled. A doctor caught him before he fell, but even the doctor's hands were trembling. "Can you hear me?" one of the doctors asked gently, leaning close to the girl. "If you can hear me, blink once." There was a pause. The room held its breath. Then, slowly, the girl blinked. A sound escaped the mother that didn't sound human, something between a cry and a prayer. Nurses covered their mouths, openly crying now. Even seasoned doctors ed their eyes, trying to regain composure. Science could explain vital signs, brain activity, probabilities, but it could not explain this feeling, this moment, this sudden return of hope where none had existed. The sister began to sing again, softly this time, not out of desperation anymore, but gratitude. Her voice was gentle, almost shaky, like she was afraid the miracle might still slip away. The girl's eyes followed the sound, her gaze locking onto her sister's face. For a brief moment, recognition flickered across her expression. The girl's fingers squeezed back. It wasn't strong, it wasn't perfect, but it was intentional. That was the moment the room truly broke. Doctors stepped back, giving the family space they rarely ever got in critical moments. The machines continued their steady rhythm, but now they felt like background noise instead of a countdown. Life had returned, quietly but unmistakably. Word spread quickly through the hallway. Staff who had never met the girl peeked in through the glass, tears in their eyes. Some whispered prayers, others simply stood in silence, humbled by what they had just witnessed. The girl tried to speak again, her throat dry, her body weak from weeks of stillness. The doctor gently stopped her. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe. You don't need to talk yet." But the sister leaned close, her forehead resting gently against her sister's hand. "You don't have to say anything," she whispered through tears. "I'm here. I never left." The girl blinked again, a tear sliding down the side of her face. In that hospital room, surrounded by wires and machines and people who had almost lost hope, something shifted forever. Fear loosened its grip. Silence was replaced with quiet laughter through tears. Despair gave way to belief. No one would ever forget this moment. Not the nurses who stopped believing in miracles years ago, not the doctors who had learned to expect the worst, and certainly not the family who had stood on the edge of goodbye. A sister sang to God when words were no longer enough, and against every expectation an answer came. Some moments don't just change a day, they change hearts, they change faith, they change everything.